This video will address specifically what are the theories and perspectives and how do they examine the family. For a variety of reasons, sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists want to examine elements of the family to figure out why they happen. The family has been described as being essential and to the core of what society is. Society influences the family, but ultimately the family also influences society. So it is important for sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists to study the family. Up at the top here, I have put culture, which is anthropology, individuals, which is psychology, and groups, which is sociology. Within all of these disciplines, we examine the family and a number of different things within that. So within culture and the family, we are going to examine and use the theories to examine changes, choices, reasons, what's the function, what causes dysfunction, and relationships. We can do that when we examine individuals within the family as well. What are the changes and the choices they're making? What are the reasons for their behavior, their function, dysfunction, and their relationships with other individuals? And in fact, we can do this with groups as well. We can look at the family as a group as well as greater society. And within that, we can examine, using the theories, what has influenced the changes, choices, reasons, function, dysfunction, and relationships within. So why don't we get right into the theories so that we can elaborate on the text that you have in the content for Unit 1, Activity 3, and I can give you some examples as I talk through them. Functionalism is a method for understanding how social institutions fill social needs. Customs and practices in society provide a form of stability for the entire system. This is an anthropological theory, so we're looking at cultural customs and practices. And culture ultimately influences the family in its beliefs and its values and some of the very core practices and rituals that they have. When I was thinking about functionalism, it made me think of the 6 functions of the family. That if a family is to be functional and to explain the purpose and intention of their practices, their beliefs, their values, I think it comes back to this, that when we're looking at what the family is doing, that these are the areas that cultures can influence their behavior, how they raise their kids, how they control the members of the family so that they are doing what they need to do. Bringing new members in, that can be influenced by culture as well. All of these things in functionalism would be examined to try and understand what is their purpose within the family, within greater society. The next theory is cultural materialism. This is a little bit more complicated to understand as there's many different parts of what cultural materialism is. Cultural materialists believe that there are actually structures in place and there's multiple levels. It's like a layer, and all of these things are influencing one another in order to create products or to create a system that influences members of that society. It states that physical materials, conditions, and economic activity within an environment determine how the ideas and ideology of a culture develops. I once watched a documentary on Papua New Guinea, which doesn't have very much produce. They don't have imports and they don't have exports, and often remains close to a third world country because they don't have anything to offer. So people aren't putting money into Papua New Guinea, and Papua New Guinea doesn't have a whole lot to offer to other countries in terms of exports. Because of this, it has stunted their development in terms of what Westernites often believe to have technology as the forefront of development. However, where we are in Canada, we have a number of resources. So we have a prosperous economic situation that allows for us to export but also import ideas and concepts and products. So say, for example, if we were to go back to the 1950s, I'm seeing this picture of washers and dryers. What's important to pay attention here is that the family was revolutionized when technology became a part of the family and brought into the household. Women who were typically in charge of household chores now had machines to help them, and they could do it in a fraction of the time. Whereas maybe in third world countries, women weren't able to go off and do other things because they're still responsible for taking care of the children and the household chores. This is what cultural materialism is all about, how the products, conditions, and economic activities can actually shape and influence not only society, but the family. Conflict theory is based on Marxism. Marx believed that a capitalist society was inherently unequal, and that's because it's a system that keeps those who are rich and powerful, and those who are not, who are typically workers under these managers who are making lots of money, it keeps them poor, and that there's not much room for vertical mobility where they're able to move up in a position of power. What he believed is that those who were rich were exploiting the people who were poor because they needed the money, so they needed the job, so they weren't able to do much. They were at the oppressive force of the people who were in charge of their workplace, but also their money. Conflict theory is examining the system in which individuals are at a place of inequality because of economic systems. Systems theory is one that is specifically tailored to examining the family. It examines how groups of individuals act as a system, a set of different parts that work together and influence one another to show stability over time. Family systems theory applies to the examination of family processes, a basic concept that is family systems have a complex organization. If you want to understand the dynamics of a family, you need to understand not only who's related to who, but what's going on with that family. When I taught this course in the classroom, we would often make systems theory and genograms to understand our own families. It's not just a family tree, but in fact has a legend that identifies the relationship and the systems between people. Here's an example from the textbook for this course. Here we have two people who were married. According to the legend, Ted is no longer as he has passed away. So Margaret, the mother, has a subsystem with Grant because she no longer has a husband. Her son, Grant, has married Pamela, and here we can identify Pamela's family. Within these individuals, we have relationships. The pink line identifies a conjugal relationship. That means they're in an intimate relationship. So Grant and Pamela, it doesn't say specifically, but we can see here that they may be married or living together. Grant and Pamela have had children. They have had Emma, Colleen, and Pamela from a previous marriage had Andrew, because Andrew is not connected on the tree to Grant. Here we see with Andrew that there's a lot of conflict with his mom, with his stepdad, and with his stepsister. Colleen, who is Grant and Pamela's daughter, is in a conjugal relationship with Eddie. Here we see a subsystem of the two sisters. Emma is married to Sanjay, and they have a daughter. So here we have we didn't have subsystems around the married couples or those who were in romantic relationships. We had subsystems as part of the family. And all of this in the genogram can show us essentially not only who's related to whom, but what's going on within the family. Feminism is connected to conflict theory in that it looks for inequality. Only in feminism, they are looking at women as facing inequality within relationships, whether that be in the workforce or in the household. I believe I had a picture, but maybe I didn't. Here it is. Feminism is not necessarily inherent that men cause this inequality. What feminism often looks for are the barriers that challenge women to equality. In this picture, we see that they have the same amount of distance to run. However, the woman has a few more hurdles to overcome. Feminism wants to examine what are these hurdles and what can we do as a family or a society in order to help them overcome those hurdles. Structural functionalism is a lot like functionalism in that it examines, only this time we're in sociology, so we're examining society and the family. It's examining society around and its influence on the family when it comes to what is the function and purpose of the norms, customs, traditions, and institutions within that system. In psychology, we have symbolic interactionism. Trying to remember where they are. Maybe not. In symbolic interactionism, it's the idea that, we do have a picture for that, I know that. Maybe it got closed down. No, there it is. In symbolic interactionism, it is the idea that we have a perception of how we're to behave. And based on the messages that we get from other people, we interpret that message and then try and send a message back based on what we understand. Dr. John Gray wrote a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And essentially what it addressed was that men and women have very different priorities. And in that, because they have different concepts of what's important to them, they often have trouble communicating. They send out a message, they get a message back, and sometimes somewhere in there, they're lost in translation and not able to communicate. Exchange theory, which as I was going through all those pictures and you saw Prince Charles and Lady Diana, relates to exchange theory. Essentially, this is looking at pros and cons of situations. Pros and cons, or costs and benefits. Costs are things that you give away, or negatives, and benefits are the positive part. When choosing a woman to marry, Prince Charles, who is the heir to the throne, was somewhat pressured into marrying Princess Diana, as she's later known. The reasons for this were varied. She had wealth, she came from nobility or a nobility background, and she had youth on her side. People loved her as well. What most people didn't know at that time was in fact that Prince Charles was in love with Camilla, who he is now currently married to, after the divorce from Diana and later her death. Camilla and Prince Charles were in a relationship before Diana, but Camilla wasn't a proper fit. She didn't come from the right background. She didn't have enough money or enough status to be married to the future King of England. And so Charles chose Diana. It was later revealed throughout that they were always in a troubled relationship and that essentially he was having an affair with Camilla throughout his marriage to Diana. So while they weighed the pros and the cons, and Diana won out because she had more benefits, you always choose the option with more benefits, that ultimately it wouldn't lead to a great relationship between them. And last but not least is life course approach, in which Erik Erikson described different stages that individuals need to go through in order to develop, and that you can't move on to the different stages before overcoming a conflict or a developmental stage. So you could have a 20-year-old stuck in a play age stage because they never got over